All right, good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to talk for a minute about why I think, as someone who's not a Zionist, why I think it's good for Israel to annex the West Bank and Gaza, for that matter, annex the whole thing. The reason that I feel is that Israel should not be a Jewish state. If you make a two-state solution, that is, so I don't mean just what they're talking about now, that they're going to annex the Jewish settlements and not annex the Arab communities. I think Israel should just annex the whole thing, declare itself a non-sectarian state. I mean, they won this land in the war. Stop calling itself a Jewish state and just be a plain democratic republic without any particular religion, have freedom of religion in the Jeffersonian sense, not in the British sense. And that would pretty much solve all the issues in Israel. The problem is the Zionists insist on having a Jewish state, which is a defiance against God. Because, like we read in this week's Parsha, after the sin of the spies, there were a group, much like today's Zionists, they were called the Mapilim, who went up and tried to seize the Holy Land, and they were utterly defeated. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, "V'hi lo yitzlach," and it will not succeed. And we see, maybe it's not as bad as that right now, the total annihilation, but still, 72 years now, right, that they've had this state, and it's just been suffering wars, terrorism, all kinds of horrible things. And since the 1890s, when this movement began, the Muslims, who used to be the best friends of the Jews throughout most of history, all of a sudden, with some exceptions when you had extremists like the Almohads, but the normal mainstream Muslims got along very well with Jews. We had our disagreements on whether or not Jesus and Muhammad are prophets. We don't believe they were, and the Muslims believe they were. All right. Other than that, it's such a big deal. All right, that they eat camel and we don't. They pray 5 times a day and we pray 3 times a day. You know, we can more or less get along. And so all the fighting now, it's not a religious fight between Jews and Muslims, but it's a political fight between Arabs and Israelis. But for the most part, although it's getting there, it's not quite what it used to be. But for the most part, the Arab Israelis are loyal Israeli citizens, and they get along well. And not only that, but they live very good lives. Financially, they have much more prosperity than the average Arab outside of Eretz Israel. So if the Palestinians also became Israeli citizens, they could also enjoy a good life. It's that the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and Hamas don't want to allow them to have these comforts. So that's the story. So that's why I think, if just Israel would just annex everything, that would be it. We'd solve the whole issue, because it would be one country. Now, still, the individual areas could still maintain their cultures. I think the United States model, which we call federalism, is the best model to solve this issue. Meaning, you'd have one central government that's non-sectarian, and it's limited by a constitution. And then you have various states, meaning the West Bank could be one state, and Gaza could be one state, and that would solve the whole issue that these two areas are not connected geographically. They'd be states like the United States, and perhaps maybe to maintain some balance of power or something, and to prevent a takeover by extremists. Maybe you could have 3 Jewish majority states and 2 Arab majority states. And so these individual states would be like states in America, and they would have to answer to a limited central federal government that would be non-sectarian. I think from the anti-Zionist point of view, that could solve a lot of the issues of the violations of the Shlosh Shavuos. The Neturei Karta would not accept it, but the more mainstream Sabmarists probably would even start to vote in the elections for a non-sectarian state that's not identifying as a Jewish state. And because they do currently vote in local elections, many of them. Because there's nothing wrong to have a city, Jerusalem, to have a government. You have to have a government and you can vote. So that's why I am not against this annexation. I think it's a step in the right direction, but they need to do more. They need to annex the whole thing, federally speaking, and give certain level of states' rights, autonomy to the states, and have a federal government that protects it, meaning both that as currently is in Israel, but would be lacking in a Palestinian state, meaning is the protection of minorities. Meaning Israel protects the rights of the Arabs that live there, even though they're a minority, but we have no indication that a potential Palestinian state, as far as we know, would be protecting the rights of Jews who would live there, although we don't really know. I think really a large part of it is the embarrassment from the Israeli side if they would do such a thing. Meaning if the Israelis had let who was it who did the disengagement? Who was it that forced the Jews to leave Gaza? Was the Israelis, was the Zionists, because it would be an embarrassment to them if Jews were able to become Palestinian citizens. It would prove the whole Zionist ideology wrong. So, I think this is the answer, and it's amazing to me that nobody's really saying this. It seems like everybody really is supporting a two-state solution, which I think would be disastrous because the leadership of the Palestinians, the self-proclaimed Palestinians, I mean, the idea of Palestinians is as fake as the idea of Israelis. They're both just made-up nonsense. But it's a reality that exists now. The leadership of the Palestinians, is either corrupt on the PLO side or dangerous on the Hamas side. Hamas don't have the corruption issues, but they have the terrorist issues, and the PLO people there, the PA, they're both. They're corrupt and they're terrorists. So it doesn't make any sense to give them their own state and put Jewish lives in danger and put the other Arab lives in danger. Everybody's lives are in danger, and everybody's situation is in danger when you have something so corrupt and dangerous like that. The terrorists themselves, they wind up blowing themselves up half the time. So that's not acceptable. There needs to be some level of embracing basic values of human rights, basically. And I know they're always saying, the Israelis are violating human rights, and Palestinians are much worse. And the Israelis really don't violate human rights. I'm not against Zionism because the state of Israel is violating human rights. It's not true. If it was true, I mean, they violate Jewish human rights, but they don't really violate the Muslim human rights that much. Whatever they're doing is in retaliation and in defense of their own interests. However, they persecute pious Jews who disagree with their ideology. And that's a problem. But that's not the reason why I'm opposed to a Jewish state. The reason why I'm opposed to a Jewish state is religious. Although there are many political issues, I brought it up to Dennis Prager once. I asked, I said, how do you as a conservative support what's basically a socialist country? He said, well, Netanyahu's doing a little bit better. And then his answer is, he supported America even though he disagreed with Obama. But there's a difference. America's founding was essentially a great thing that, to me, is a miracle. And I know a lot of people think that the founding of the State of Israel is a miracle, but I find it to be an insult to God, and particularly to do something like that in the Holy Land. It's smacking God in the face by taking God's holy land and setting up, an atheist regime that still has Judaism as its official religion, not for the purpose of encouraging Judaism, even though that's sometimes a byproduct, a collateral byproduct of the State of Israel. And people always bring up, oh, look at all the yeshivas, this and that. Shkoyach, is that worth one Jewish life? We're told we have to wear masks and all these things because maybe we're spreading a disease and we don't have symptoms. And what about all the people who are killed in terrorism and wars and things that wouldn't have been if we didn't have a State of Israel? What about all the people who could have been saved from the Holocaust and gone to Israel if they would have gone as dhimmis instead of going as conquerors? There's a lot to talk about. Meaning, all 6 million could have gone to Israel, but the Mufti of Jerusalem didn't want the Zionists to come in and attack his people. If we would have gone peacefully and humbly, it would have been a different world. Alas, and this is what Rabbi the Nitra Rosh Yeshiva talked about. Rabbi Weissman. Anyway, that's the story. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. So my message, it's none of my business. I'm an American, not Israeli. But I'm not against the Israelis annexing land that they won. I think they should have done it already in 1967, annexed the whole thing. And they would have avoided all the problems, all the tsuris that they've had since then. But they didn't want to, specifically because they cared more about having a quote-unquote Jewish state and maintaining artificial Jewish majority than having peace and saving Jewish lives, because they're not about... And everyone said, oh, if there would have been a State of Israel, the Holocaust would have happened. So then how come, like Meir Kahane said, they left Pinsk and Minsk and turned Tel Aviv and Haifa into Pinsk and Minsk? It hasn't helped anybody. It's only made things worse. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. We'll see you later.